Okay, hi, I'm HAL Meier, and this is a program which we call Off the Beaten Track. As you recall, this is where we discuss those ideas, concepts, which are not yet accepted by the establishment. As far as I can tell, any establishment. It is not accepted by religious orthodoxy or the scientific community or perhaps the public at large. But that doesn't mean it's of no consequence. A lot of interesting people are talking about the things that we're discussing here, and in the years ahead, it could be that this topic also becomes generally worthy of discussion. Today, for example, our subject is the Pope, the Prophet, and the Beast. Actually, the longer title is the Final Pope, the False Prophet, and the Beast of Revelation. Now, these seem to be, if this is uncomfortable for you, that's because it's an uncomfortable subject. It's not easy to talk about. For example, it's inevitable that we will talk a considerable amount about the Catholic Church. And to begin with, I'm not Catholic myself. I'm Protestant, but I care for the Church at large and its success. What are we to do, however? Or are we in the midst of these kinds of issues and problems to remain silent? Are we to plead ignorance about them? And years from now, will we say, oh, I knew about it, but I never told anyone? I don't think so. Because after all, remember, there is this passage in Ezekiel 33 in which we are urged all to be watchmen on the tower. And there it says that if we see danger coming, we must alert our fellow man to it. Because if we alert him, and then the danger, the catastrophe, the tribulation arises, then it will not have been our fault, and the person who will have caused it is to be held accountable. But if, on the other hand, we see the danger coming and we fail to alert anyone, then it also becomes our responsibility. So it is in that spirit that I bring this to your attention. In the course of doing this, we will talk a number of times about the apparitions of the Virgin Mother, and whom I have come also to love and revere. Our answer to all of the problems and difficulties must be found in prayer. And so with that introduction, I launch now into a discussion of the final Pope. So then, what's this about the final Pope? Well, it comes from a story told about Saint Malachi. Malachi was a Roman Catholic priest in Ireland who seemed to have some psychic or clairvoyant ability, and in any event became well respected by the people in Ireland. Eventually, somebody in Rome heard about him. They invited him over there and said, would you like to be the legate from Rome to Ireland? And he said, okay, I'll try to do that. And so as he was then leaving Rome, he was on one of the 7 hills. Even then, Rome was known as the city of 7 hills. He was on one of the 7 hills, and he had a vision. The vision was of the next 112 popes to come. And for each one of the popes, he gives a motto. For example, right now, in more recent years, John Paul II, the Polish Pope, was given the motto, the labor of the sun, Well, when he was first selected, and for a long time afterward, it was not at all clear what the labor of the Son had to do with John Paul II, and so it could be that he could have been ignored, that it could have been ignored. But actually, when looking back, it was discovered that John Paul II was born on a day when there was an eclipse of the sun. And he died and was buried on a day when there was another eclipse. So here is some visual and cosmic story about what it is that about John Paul II. That kind of thing happened throughout the 112 popes. For example, the 111th pope became known as Pope Benedict XVI, and Benedict XVI, or at least the 111th pope, was to be known as the Glory of the Olives. Well, what does that have to do with the man who became Benedict XVI? It has this to do that he was a member of the Benedictine order, and their shield, by which they identified themselves, had the image of two olive branches. In addition, they had a subset within the Benedictine order called the Olivetans. The Olivetans, so that obviously that also refers to the same general subject. So it was that 112 of these popes were so identified. For a long time, when it was first said, people managed to ignore the fact that there were 112 popes to come, and since that was going to be a period of 900 or 1000 years, you could expect that they would ignore the question. Well, they succeeded ignoring it for quite a long time, until somewhere in the end of the 16th century, it was discovered that they could use that information. They could manipulate the election of the Pope by referring to the motto that was going to be given to them. Well, perhaps for that reason, and maybe for others, eventually the powers that be began to pay attention to this. And there was a publication, finally, of the 112 prophecies in about 1593. So from that time on, some attention has been paid. Now in the 112th Pope, this was going to be the final one. And the final Pope was going to be called Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman. And let me just read to you what it is being said about Peter the Roman. And here it is. In extreme persecution, the seat of the Holy Roman Church will be occupied by Peter the Roman, who will feed the sheep through many tribulations. When they are over, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible or fearsome judge will judge his people. So here in the last of the predictions, there is not just a motto, Peter the Roman, but there is a whole paragraph describing what kind of a pope he will be. Okay, well, so it was to be. But the question remains. The question remains: what? So what? Is it? How do we know that the prediction was accurate? How do we know that even if it was the final pope, how do we know that this one, Francis I, should be identified as this individual? So when it comes to that, we don't have an indication from Malachi himself. We have only to review some of the other predictions that have been made about him. Now let me read you some of the other kinds of predictions. The first one I want to read you is from the prophecy given by in La Salette, France in 1846. And here's the way that goes. The earth will be struck by calamities of all kinds, in addition to plague and famine, which will be widespread. There will be a series of wars until the last war, which will then be fought by the 10 kings of the Antichrist. So we enter that into the whole issue of the final papacy, all of whom will have one and the same plan and will be the only rulers of the world. Before this comes to pass, there will be a false peace in the world. And if this is all true, maybe this is the time of a so-called false peace. People will think of nothing but amusement. The wicked will give themselves over to all kinds of sin, and this will be the hour of darkness. The church will suffer a terrible crisis. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. The church will be in eclipse. The world will be in dismay. So not only is the time of the final pope potentially, it is preceded by stress and chaos, and finally comes to pass with a great catastrophe and the loss of faith. Well, okay, that's what, and that prophecy, by the way, on La Salette has been accepted by the Roman Catholic Church as a valid prophecy. Well, what else was said and who said it? Here's another one by St. Francis. St. Francis of Assisi said, Francis of Assisi, one of the most venerated religious figures in history, gathered his devotees shortly before his death and prophesied that, quote, at the time of this tribulation, a man not canonically elected will be raised to the pontificate, who by his cunning will endeavor to draw many into error and death. Some preachers will keep silence about the truth, and others will trample it under foot and deny it. For in those days, Jesus Christ will send them not a true pastor, but a destroyer. Now, there are a couple of things to be remembered in this reference. It says not canonically elected. Well, we don't know that that's true. We have no indication of that. It is also true that having been sworn to secrecy, the cardinals are under a great burden not to talk about it. So we will very likely never know whether he was correctly elected at the conclave recently in Rome. So again, pieces of this seem to be reminiscent of the truth, but some of them, however, in the end, don't quite fit together. Well, we're going to talk about more of these things in a few minutes when we get back for the next 15-minute segment. At now, let's just break it off and be right back. Okay, we're back. We're now back with the second segment of this 1 hour long program, and we're going to pick up where we left off. That is, we were identifying some of the predictions that had been made about the final pope. We talked about the prophecy made at La Salette in France. We talked about that made by St. Francis of Assisi, and now we're going to discuss a few more. And by the way, this wouldn't be complete, of course, unless we talked about the prophecies of Nostradamus? Well, because the trouble with Nostradamus is that almost nobody understands him. Whatever he says is very hard to figure out, and I have myself 7 or 8 books about him, and each one of them contradicts the next one. So one might be tempted to just ignore that subject altogether. On the other hand, in recent years, there has been a very interesting development in Nostradamus studies. A gal by the name of Dolores Cannon, who regresses people to previous lifetimes. She says she does, and her clients think so too. Discovered that one of her clients ended up in the living room or the study of Nostradamus himself 500 years ago. And as a result, she asked all kinds of questions about what he meant by each one of the complicated and difficult to understand quatrains or poetries. So what is it that Nostradamus says about the 112th Pope? Well, actually, he has a lot to say about it. For example, he said this, and he gave a series of characteristics. He said this Pope would be from Old France. Well, I don't know what Old France is, but some people say that in those days, Old France included parts of Spain. And Spain, of course, eventually conquered and was colonized much of South and Central America, including Argentina, from which this Pope came. So it's not an exact match by any means, but if you're looking for ways to hang things together, maybe this Pope was foreseen by being from Argentina. What else? It is said that he will be red, black, and young. Well, red and black could be, of course, the color of the uniform, and as a Pope, he would wear a red cassock, scarlet. Everybody worldwide recognizes this. Not so remarkable, because only the clergy were in the conclave, and so they would all turn out to be cardinals of the Roman Catholic faith. So let's bear that in mind. At the same time, he was a Jesuit. Jesuits wear black robes. They have a superior general, head of the order, who's known colloquially as the Black Pope. And so red, black, okay. Young, I have no idea. Maybe in the years ahead, we will discover whether in some fashion he is young, but certainly his age at 76, he probably is not considered young by that standard. What else do we know? Well, it is said that he will have a disability of some kind. Does this Pope have a disability? Well, he has one lung. One was removed when he was a boy due to an infection. He is now under medication, has been, I guess, much of his life, because he has only one lung to use. So perhaps, maybe that's a match. And finally, one of the most difficult things for me to say, it says he will be deeply disturbed. Well, if the Pope turns out to be also the false prophet, then there's a lot of reason to believe that that would be a deep psychological disturbance. On the other hand, this Pope shows no signs of that. He seems like a thoroughly spiritual man. It looks like he is very interested in social justice. He cares about the